Did you know that a family can seem perfect right up until the moment it shatters? Imagine a family portrait, everyone smiling, proud, and united. Now, imagine that portrait was taken right after a huge, costly victory that saved the family home from a dangerous rival. That was the relationship between Great Britain and her 13 American colonies in 1763. It was a golden age, a moment of shared triumph that felt like it would last forever. But sometimes, the greatest victories carry the seeds of the most bitter conflicts. It's almost funny, in a dark sort of way, how winning a war together can be the very thing that starts the next one. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let's begin tonight's journey. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. It hangs in the humid summer air of 1763, clinging to your wool coat as you stand in the bustling streets of Philadelphia. All around you, church bells are pealing, a joyous, chaotic symphony that vibrates deep in your chest. Just a few months ago, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the long and brutal French and Indian War. It was a global conflict, but for you, here in the colonies, it was a fight for your very backyard, and you won. More than that, we won. The French threat that loomed over your borders for generations is gone, vanquished by the might of the British Empire, the greatest empire the world has ever known. You look up and see the Union Jack waving from every flagpole, a splash of bold red, white, and blue against the endless sky. A profound sense of belonging washes over you. You are British. This feeling, this deep connection, is something modern psychology might call identity fusion. It's when your personal identity, your sense of me, becomes inseparable from the group identity, the sense of us. An attack on Britain felt like a personal attack on you. A victory for the crown felt like your own personal triumph. You and your fellow colonists had sacrificed for this. You fought, you bled, and you paid. And now, you are reaping the rewards. The vast, fertile lands of the Ohio Valley, once a bloody battleground, are now open. The future feels as wide and promising as the continent itself. You raise a pewter tankard of flip, a peculiar colonial drink of beer, rum, and sugar, frothed by plunging a red-hot poker from the fire right into it. The liquid hisses and steams, and you toast King George III, a young, promising monarch. Your powdered wig might be a bit itchy from the excitement, but it feels like a small price to pay for this moment of pure, unadulterated pride. But as the bonfires burn down to glowing embers and the cheers fade into the quiet of the night, a different feeling begins to creep in. It's subtle at first, like a distant chill on a warm evening. The war, this glorious, continent-securing war, was expensive, incredibly expensive. The British national debt has nearly doubled, soaring to an astronomical £133 million. Someone has to pay for it. And as you look across the Atlantic, you can almost feel the gaze of Parliament turning towards you, the American colonies. The parent has just spent a fortune protecting the child, and now it's time for the child to start paying their way. You and your fellow colonists have enjoyed the protection and trade of the empire, a set of what you could almost call golden handcuffs. They are comfortable, secure, and prestigious, but they are handcuffs nonetheless. They imply an obligation, a debt. For the first time, you start to wonder what, exactly, the price of that protection will be. Historians still debate whether the colonists' primary motivation was the protection of their wallets or the preservation of their philosophical rights. But standing here, in the afterglow of victory, you can feel the two becoming entangled. The joy of being British is still warm in your heart, but a new, quiet question has appeared. Are you a partner in this great empire, or are you just a resource? The answer, you feel, is coming soon, and it might not be the one you want to hear. The joy of victory quickly fades into the chill of a harsh autumn wind. It's October 1763, And the British government has just issued something called the Proclamation of 1763. You hear about it from a broadside posted on the tavern wall. Its stark print, a stark contrast to the celebratory notices of just a few months prior. Your brow furrows as you read it, the words blurring slightly at first, then coalescing into a truly infuriating message. The vast, fertile lands west of the Appalachian Mountains, those lands you and your ancestors fought and died for, are now off-limits to colonial settlement. A line, invisible yet incredibly rigid, has been drawn down the crest of the Appalachians, separating you from the very future you believed you had earned. Imagine, for a moment, that you've just finished a massive home renovation project. You've poured your sweat and savings into it, knocking down walls, expanding rooms, dreaming of the perfect space for your growing family. And then, just as you're about to move in, your wealthy, slightly overbearing parent steps in and says, "Oh darling, that new addition you built, it's lovely, but you can't actually use it. It's for, well, other people, or perhaps just for looking at." The proclamation feels exactly like that. A sudden, arbitrary decree that snatches away a promised future. To you, this land is not just dirt and trees. It's opportunity. It's the chance for your children to have their own farms, to escape the increasingly crowded coastal cities, to carve out a new destiny. This is the promised land, or so you thought. The British Crown's official reasoning is to prevent further conflicts with Native American tribes, some of whom, like Pontiac's Confederacy, are still actively resisting British expansion after the French and Indian War. It makes a certain kind of logical sense from their perspective across the ocean. They've just spent a fortune, remember, and they don't want to spend more protecting you from disgruntled indigenous populations who, let's be honest, aren't too keen on you encroaching on their hunting grounds. But to you, standing here, it feels like a betrayal. You interpret it not as protection, but as a denial of your rights, a cynical move to keep you contained, perhaps even to ensure a ready market for British manufactured goods. You're told this is for your own good, a classic parental line, but you feel like a child being told to stay in your room while the rest of the house is open for exploration. This is where the psychological concept of perceived injustice starts to fester. You believe you've contributed, you've earned your share of the spoils of war, and now the spoils are being withheld. It's not just about the land itself, but the principle. It's about being treated as a subordinate, not an equal. Your spirit, once soaring with the eagles of empire, now feels caged. You hear whispers in the taverns, hushed conversations in the market squares, about how the British don't really understand you, how they view you as a source of raw materials and a captive market for their goods. This isn't just about government policy anymore. It's about a growing chasm in understanding and empathy between parent and child. An interesting, if macabre, historical curiosity among the various native groups resisting the British. Some employed tactics like biological warfare, specifically attempting to spread smallpox among British forces by giving them infected blankets. Not exactly your everyday diplomatic tool, is it? Historians still debate whether the proclamation was a genuine attempt at fair dealing with Native American tribes, or simply a cynical ploy to control colonial expansion and taxation. But for you, the impact is immediate and visceral. You watch as hopeful settlers, who had already begun packing their wagons, turn back, their faces grim and defeated. The dream of westward expansion, a dream as old as the first ships landing on these shores, has been abruptly and unilaterally put on hold. The golden handcuffs are beginning to feel less like a secure embrace and more like a restrictive chain. The invisible line drawn on a map in London has become a very real barrier in your heart, separating you from the future you were promised. The invisible line drawn in the dirt has now been followed by an invisible hand reaching into your pocket. The year is now 1764, and word arrives of a new law passed by Parliament, something called the Sugar Act. At first, the news seems almost ... good. You gather with merchants and sailors down at the docks, the air thick with the smell of brine and tar, and you learn that the new act actually lowers the tax on foreign molasses from 6p a gallon to 3p. A cheer goes up from some of the men. Molasses is the lifeblood of New England's rum industry, a key ingredient in your trade with the world, and a cheaper tax sounds like a victory. But as the full details of the act are read aloud, a heavy silence falls over the crowd. This is not a gift, it's a trap, beautifully wrapped in a tax cut. The old Molasses Act of 1733 was famously ineffective. The 6p tax was so high that it was more profitable to bribe a customs official with a penny and smuggle the molasses in. It was a kind of open secret, a game everyone played. The British government knew you were smuggling, you knew they knew, and everyone just sort of winked and carried on. But the Sugar Act changes the rules of the game entirely. The lower tax is designed to be just low enough that it's cheaper to pay it than to risk smuggling, and to make sure you do pay it. The act comes with a host of new enforcement measures that feel less like trade regulation and more like a military occupation of your commerce. Suddenly, British customs officials are everywhere, empowered with documents called writs of assistance. These are essentially blank search warrants, allowing them to board any ship or enter any warehouse or even your home, at any time, for any reason, looking for smuggled goods. This is where the psychological damage truly begins. It's a profound violation of the principle that an Englishman's home is his castle. Now, your castle has no drawbridge. The security you felt, the simple right to privacy, is gone. Even more terrifying, anyone accused of violating the Sugar Act will now be tried in a Vice Admiralty court. These are special courts with no jury. Your fate would be decided by a single, royally appointed judge. And here's the truly insidious part. The judge receives a 5% commission on any fines or confiscated cargo. He has a direct financial incentive to find you guilty. The burden of proof is also reversed. You are presumed guilty and must prove your own innocence. It's a system designed for convictions, not for justice. You feel a profound sense of cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort that comes from holding to conflicting beliefs. Belief 1. You are a loyal British subject, entitled to all the rights and freedoms of someone born in London. Belief 2. Your government is treating you like a common criminal, stripping you of your fundamental right to a trial by a jury of your peers. The parent isn't just setting rules anymore. The parent has installed cameras in your room and is going through your pockets while you sleep. The stated purpose of the Sugar Act was explicitly to raise revenue from the colonies. This was a first. Previous acts were about regulating the empire's trade, but this was a direct tax levied by a parliament in which you have no representation. Historians still debate whether the colonial outrage was a noble defense of liberty or the desperate cry of smugglers whose business model was suddenly under threat. But for you, it feels like a violation of the soul. The economic pinch is real, but the wound to your identity as a freeborn Briton is far deeper. The sweet taste of molasses is suddenly turning bitter in your mouth. The bitter taste of the Sugar Act has now been joined by the gritty, papery texture of pure indignation. It is the spring of 1765, and the news that arrives from London this time is not a complex piece of trade regulation, but something so simple, so direct, and so profoundly insulting that it takes your breath away. It is called the Stamp Act, and it is not a tax on a specific good, like molasses, that you might be able to avoid. It is a tax on paper, all of it, every newspaper you read, to catch up on world events, every legal document, from a will to a deed, every license, every diploma, every pamphlet, and move that feels almost comically villainous, every deck of playing cards, and every pair of dice. Imagine a world where every email you send, every document you sign, every book you read required you to first buy and affix a digital stamp, a microtransaction paid directly to a government you had no say in electing. That is the reality that now confronts you. The Act requires that all these materials be printed on specially stamped paper produced in London, or have a stamp embossed upon them. This small, innocuous-looking stamp is a physical manifestation of Parliament's authority, a constant, nagging reminder that your life is being micromanaged from 3,000 miles away. You go to the tavern to relax with friends over a game of whist, and there it is, the king's stamp on your cards. You pick up a newspaper to read about the latest political outrage, and the first thing you see is the very symbol of that outrage stamped onto the page. This is a psychological masterstroke of oppression, whether intentional or not. Unlike the Sugar Act, which primarily angered merchants and the coastal elite, the Stamp Act reaches into every corner of colonial life and infuriates everyone. The lawyer cannot file his briefs, the student cannot receive his diploma, the landowner cannot sell his property, the sailor cannot get his papers. The printer, who is the lifeblood of communication in the colonies, is essentially being taxed for the act of communicating, and you, the common citizen, are being taxed for the simple acts of living, learning, and playing. The parent is no longer just going through your pockets. Now, they are charging you a fee for the very paper you use to write in your diary. It feels deeply, profoundly personal. Here's an especially cruel twist, an obscure but infuriating detail of the law. The tax had to be paid in British sterling, in hard currency, what you call specie, gold and silver coins. This sounds reasonable until you remember that the colonies are desperately short on hard currency. Much of your economy runs on barter, credit, and locally printed paper money. Specie is rare, used primarily to pay debts to British merchants. By demanding payment in a currency you barely possess, Parliament is not only taxing you, it's draining your economy of its most precious resource. It feels like being asked to pay a fine in a foreign language you don't speak, with money you don't have. This is the moment the abstract constitutional argument becomes a burning fire in your gut. The famous cry, "No taxation without representation," is no longer a philosophical debate for bewigged gentlemen in assembly halls. It's a roar of fury from every level of society. Historians still debate whether the primary colonial objection was economic, a simple anger at the cost, or ideological, a rejection of Parliament's right to tax them at all. But for you, the two have become inseparable. You see the stamp not just as a financial burden, but as a brand, a mark of your subservience. For the first time, you see colonists from Georgia to New Hampshire, people who have always thought of themselves as Virginians or New Yorkers first, now looking at each other with a shared sense of violation. This single, simple act has done more to unify you with your fellow colonists than 100 sermons on brotherhood. The indignation is no longer a quiet simmer. It is beginning to boil over. Just as you're wrapping your head around the idea of your own government branding your life with a tax stamp, you hear a new sound in the streets. It's a sound you remember from the war, a sound that once brought a feeling of security, of pride. It's the rhythmic, percussive sound of marching boots on cobblestones, the jingle of military accoutrements, the low baritone commands of a British officer. But now, the sound doesn't bring comfort. It brings a cold knot of dread to the pit of your stomach. The redcoats are here. And they're not just passing through on their way to fight the French, they're here to stay. And you, it turns out, are expected to be their landlord. This new law, passed alongside the Stamp Act in 1765, is called the Quartering Act. It's a piece of legislation that feels, in its own way, even more invasive than the stamp. The law requires the colonial assemblies to pay for the housing and provisioning of British troops stationed in America. You are now legally obligated to provide them with barracks, or, if those are full, to rent out space for them in taverns, inns, and other public houses. You must also supply them with everything a soldier might need, from firewood and candles to vinegar, salt, and even a daily ration of beer or cider. In essence, your parent has decided to send a very large, very armed, and very expensive babysitter to watch over you, and you are being forced to pay for the privilege. The psychology of this is devastating. Your home, and by extension your community, is your sanctuary. It is the one place in the world where you are in charge, where you feel safe and secure. The Quartering Act fundamentally violates this sacred space. It's one thing for a distant government to take your money. It's another thing entirely for them to place their armed enforcers right in your neighborhood, walking your streets, drinking in your taverns, their redcoats a constant, vivid reminder of who is truly in charge. The soldiers you once toasted as heroes and defenders of the realm now feel like an occupying force. Their presence changes everything. The easy chatter in the marketplace becomes hushed when they walk by. A late-night stroll feels less safe, more fraught with the potential for conflict. Here is an interesting and often misunderstood curiosity about the initial act. The 1765 Quartering Act did not, as is commonly believed, force soldiers into your private family home. That was a later fear, and a feature of subsequent, more punitive acts. This first version focused on public spaces and barracks. However, the psychological effect was nearly the same. The principle of the thing was the poison. The New York Colonial Assembly, for example, famously resisted the act, refusing to allocate the full amount of funds required. They saw it for what it was, a tax in disguise, a way for Parliament to force them to pay for a standing army they did not want and did not ask for. An army that, since the French were gone, seemed to have no other purpose than to enforce the very laws you were protesting. This transforms the soldiers from protectors into occupiers. During the French and Indian War, you welcomed them, sharing your food and homes willingly because you shared a common enemy. Now, the enemy is gone, and you begin to wonder if, in the eyes of Parliament, the new enemy is you. Historians still debate whether the Quartering Act was a pragmatic military necessity for a global empire trying to manage its forces, or a deliberate political strategy to intimidate the increasingly unruly colonies. To the British, it was simple logistics. Armies need a place to sleep. To you, it feels like a violation, a constant low-grade home invasion. Every drumbeat, every shouted command from the barracks feels like a direct challenge to your autonomy. The golden handcuffs are gone, replaced by an iron collar, and the men holding the chain are now sleeping just down the street. The dread in your stomach, that cold not caused by the sight of redcoats in your streets, has now been joined by a hot, rising flush of anger. You feel trapped. Parliament has taxed your paper, invaded your privacy, and garrisoned soldiers in your town. Each new law feels like another bar being added to a cage you didn't even realize was being built around you. Individual grumbling in taverns and angry letters to the local newspaper feel utterly pointless, like shouting into a hurricane. The parent isn't listening. But then, something new begins to happen. The scattered whispers of discontent are starting to harmonize, forming a single, defiant chorus. You are no longer just an angry individual. You are becoming part of a movement. It starts in the shadows. You hear talk of a new group, a secret society calling themselves the Sons of Liberty. The name itself is a stroke of genius, a piece of branding that is both defiant and noble. An obscure fact you learn later is that the name was lifted directly from a speech in the British Parliament. An Irish MP named Isaac Barre, defending you and your fellow colonists, had referred to you as these Sons of Liberty. You've taken a phrase meant to defend you in their halls of power and turned it into a weapon in your own streets. The Sons of Liberty are not gentlemen writing polite petitions. They are merchants, artisans, and laborers, and their methods are far more direct. You see their work one morning, hanging from a great elm tree on the Boston Common. It's an effigy, a straw-stuffed dummy made to look like Andrew Oliver, the newly appointed stamp distributor. A sign pinned to its chest makes its purpose clear. Later that night, a crowd, their faces illuminated by flickering torchlight, marches to Oliver's office. a newly built structure, and pulls it down to its foundation, piece by piece. This is mob action, yes, but it's fueled by a specific psychological phenomenon, a sense of collective efficacy. It's the belief that together, you can accomplish what you could never do alone. The fear you felt as an individual dissipates in the heat of the crowd. The group provides anonymity and a sense of righteous power. You hear terrifying stories of stamp agents being tarred and feathered, a brutal and humiliating punishment. The process is visceral, a ritual of public shaming designed to make the position of tax collector simply untenable. And it works. One by one, stamp agents across the colonies resign their posts, preferring their safety to a paycheck from the crown. While the Sons of Liberty are providing the muscle, another, more formal response is taking shape. In October of 1765, delegates from 9 of the 13 colonies gather in New York for what they call the Stamp Act Congress. This is unprecedented. The colonies are notoriously fractious, often squabbling with each other over land rights and trade. Getting them to agree on anything is like trying to nail jelly to a wall. But the Stamp Act has provided them with a common enemy, a threat so profound that it overrides their petty rivalries. You read their declarations, carefully worded and respectful, but firm. They affirm their loyalty to the crown, but they insist on the rights of Englishmen. Most importantly, the right to not be taxed without their consent. It's the birth of a unified political voice. This two-pronged attack, the street-level intimidation of the Sons of Liberty and the high-minded political arguments of the Stamp Act Congress, creates a powerful feedback loop. The actions of the mob give weight to the words of the politicians, while the politicians give a veneer of legitimacy to the anger of the mob. Historians still debate the true nature of the Sons of Liberty, questioning whether they were a genuine grassroots uprising or a carefully managed tool of elite merchants and politicians who used the common man's anger to protect their own financial interests. But from your perspective, it feels like a genuine awakening. For the first time, you feel a stronger kinship with a merchant from South Carolina or a lawyer from New York than you do with a British official. An us versus them mentality has taken firm root. You are no longer just a collection of disparate colonies. You are beginning to feel like a single people, united in your outrage. And for the first time in years, it feels like you might actually be winning. You breathed a collective sigh of relief in 1766. The boycotts worked. The protests, both violent and eloquent, had been heard. Parliament, facing immense pressure from British merchants who were losing a fortune, repealed the Stamp Act. It feels like a massive victory, a moment where the child shouted no, and the parent, surprisingly, listened. All across the colonies, church bells ring out in celebration once more. You toast the king, statues of George III are erected, and a feeling of reconciliation hangs in the air. The crisis is over. You have stood up for your rights as Englishmen, and those rights have been affirmed. The family argument has been resolved, and you can all go back to the prosperous business of being part of the glorious British Empire. You allow yourself to relax, to believe that the worst is over, that the misunderstanding has been cleared up. But the reconciliation is a mirage. While you were celebrating, the political winds in London were shifting. A new Chancellor of the Exchequer has come to power, a man named Charles Tempest. He is brilliant, witty, and notoriously arrogant. Known around London as Champagne Charlie for his effervescent and often intoxicated speeches in Parliament, Townshend looks at the colonial situation not as a family dispute to be mended, but as a challenge to his authority, an insult to the supremacy of Parliament. He mocks the distinction his predecessors made, and he publicly boasts that he knows how to tax the Americans without offending them. He believes he has found a loophole in your principles, a way to get your money that is so clever, so subtle, you won't even know you're being taxed. In 1767, he pushes a new series of laws through Parliament, which come to be known as the Townshend Acts. They place a new set of duties, or taxes, on specific goods that you colonists must import from Britain. The list is mundane, almost insultingly so: glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. The psychological trick here is that these are external taxes, collected at the ports before the goods even enter the colonial economy. Townshend is making a wager on your intelligence. He's betting that you only object to internal taxes, like the Stamp Act, which was a direct tax on activities happening inside the colonies. He thinks an external tax, a simple import duty, will feel like a normal part of trade regulation, something you've always accepted. It's the difference between a parent demanding you hand over a portion of your allowance, and that same parent simply increasing the price they charge you for the food in the house. The result is the same. Your money ends up in their pocket, but the method feels sneakier, more manipulative. You are not fooled for a second. In fact, you are more insulted by the trick than you were by the original offense. The parent is not just being a bully anymore. Now, they are being a liar, treating you like a simple-minded child who can't tell the difference between being taxed and being regulated. But the most insidious part of the Townshend Acts is not the taxes themselves, but where the money is intended to go. This is a crucial, terrifying detail. The revenue raised will be used to pay the salaries of colonial governors and judges, who until now have been paid by your own colonial assemblies. This gave you, the people, the power of the purse, a vital check on their authority. A governor who angered the assembly might find his salary delayed. Now, these officials will be paid directly by the crown. Their loyalty will no longer be to the people they govern, but to a distant king. It's a brilliant, cynical move to dismantle your local power structure from the inside out. Historians still debate whether Townshend genuinely believed his own distinction between internal and external taxes, or if he was simply looking for any plausible excuse to assert parliamentary supremacy. But the effect on you is profound. The brief joy of reconciliation curdles into a deep, lasting paranoia. The government is no longer just trying to take your money. It's actively trying to deceive you and strip away your self-governance. The argument is no longer just about representation. It's about trust, and that trust is now completely shattered. The game has changed, and the sense of impending conflict returns, colder and more menacing than before. The paranoia that has been festering in your heart for the past 3 years is about to be validated in the most brutal way imaginable. It is March 5th, 1770. The city of Boston is a powder keg with a dangerously short fuse. The presence of 4,000 redcoats among a population of only 16,000 citizens has created an atmosphere of constant, simmering hostility. For months, tensions have been escalating through a series of street brawls and shouting matches between soldiers and civilians. The soldiers, poorly paid and often taking on part-time jobs, are seen as competitors for work. You and your fellow Bostonians mock them as lobsterbacks for their red coats, and they sneer back at you as ungrateful rebels. Every interaction is laced with contempt. On this particular evening, the air is biting cold, and a thin, dirty layer of snow and ice coats the cobblestones of King Street. You are drawn by a commotion, a growing clamor of shouts, and the urgent ringing of a church bell. You join a crowd that is gathering in front of the custom house, the symbol of the hated Townshend duties. A lone British sentry, a private named Hugh White, is being harassed by a group of apprentices and boys. They are taunting him, throwing snowballs, ice chunks, and oyster shells. He is clearly rattled, shouting back at them, his bayonet fixed to his musket. You can feel the energy of the crowd, a volatile mix of teenage bravado, drunken anger, and genuine political frustration. It's a scene teetering on the edge of chaos. Then, the situation escalates. Captain Thomas Preston and a small detachment of 7 soldiers march through the crowd to relieve the besieged sentry. They form a small, desperate semicircle in front of the custom house steps, muskets loaded. The crowd, now numbering several hundred, presses in, a roiling sea of angry faces illuminated by the moonlight. They are daring the soldiers to fire, shouting insults, waving clubs. The air is thick with tension, a palpable thing you can almost taste. Then, through the noise and confusion, a musket shot rings out, followed by a horrifying, ragged volley. The soldiers have fired into the crowd. For a moment, there is a stunned silence, a collective intake of breath. Then, chaos erupts into screams of pain and terror. The crowd surges back, and in the space they occupied, you see dark shapes lying motionless on the blood-spattered snow. 5 men are dead or dying. The first to fall, a man of mixed African and Native American descent named Crispus Attucks, has become the first casualty of this new, undeclared war. The abstract fear of a tyrannical government has just become horrifyingly real. The soldiers you feared might oppress you have now killed you. This is a profound cognitive leap. It's the moment a parent's angry threats turn into a physical blow. The relationship is irrevocably broken. This traumatic event is immediately seized upon and transformed into a powerful narrative of martyrdom. A silversmith and propagandist named Paul Revere creates an engraving of the event, titling it The Bloody Massacre. It's a masterpiece of political spin. It depicts the soldiers as a disciplined firing squad, with a sneering Captain Preston ordering them to fire on a peaceful, unarmed crowd of respectable-looking gentlemen. He even adds a small dog in the foreground to heighten the sense of innocent life being threatened. This image, not the messy reality of the street brawl, becomes the memory of the event, printed and reprinted throughout the colonies. It confirms everyone's worst fears about British intentions. In a truly eccentric turn of events, the soldiers are put on trial, and the man who steps up to defend them is none other than a leading patriot, John Adams. He believes so fiercely in the English right to a fair trial that he risks his reputation to ensure even the hated redcoats receive one. He successfully argues that the soldiers fired in a panic, confused and provoked, winning an acquittal for most of them. Historians still debate whether Captain Preston ever gave the order to fire, or if the soldiers, terrified and overwhelmed, simply lost control. But for you and the rest of colonial America, the legal verdict is irrelevant. The emotional verdict was delivered the moment the first musket ball hit human flesh. The snow on King Street will eventually melt, but the bloodstains have seeped deep into the colonial consciousness. The bloodstains on the snow in King Street have created a permanent stain on your soul. The massacre, even after John Adams's brilliant and principled defense of the soldiers, has changed the very air you breathe. The family argument has ended in bloodshed. Then, in one of history's most profound and bitter ironies, you learn that on the very same day the massacre occurred, March 5, 1770, a new Prime Minister in London, a man named Lord North, had successfully pushed for the repeal of most of the Townshend Acts. The news arrives weeks later, carried across the vast, unforgiving Atlantic, a message of reconciliation arriving at a scene of carnage. The communication lag between the parent and the child has never felt so vast or so tragic. A strange and unsettling quiet descends upon the colonies. The duties on glass, lead, paper, and paint are gone. The non-importation agreements, which had stifled the economy, are dissolved. The merchants are happy, their warehouses once again filling with British goods. Ships are being loaded and unloaded at the docks. The rhythms of commerce, that steady heartbeat of colonial life, return. For the next 3 years, an uneasy peace settles in. It's the kind of quiet that follows a screaming match in a household, where no one is shouting anymore, but no one is truly speaking either. Everyone is just trying to get back to normal, to pretend the deep, wounding things that were said and done never happened. This is the psychology of conflict avoidance. The constant stress, the boycotts, the street fights. It was all exhausting. You, and many like you, desperately want the peace to be real. You want to believe that the parent has finally understood the child's anger. But Lord North, in his bid for peace, left one small, symbolic splinter in the wound. He kept the tax on tea. It was a minuscule tax, not enough to truly hurt the colonial economy, but its significance was monumental. It was a declaration. It was Parliament, in a quiet but firm voice, insisting on its right to tax you. Lord North himself said it was to preserve the principle, the right of taxing the Americans. It's a psychological power play. The parent has agreed to stop the specific behaviors that caused the fight, but they have refused to acknowledge that they were wrong in the first place. They are reserving the right to do it all again, whenever they see fit, and you know it. Every time you see a crate of British East India Company tea, you are reminded that the fundamental problem, the question of who holds ultimate power over your life, remains unanswered. And so, beneath the calm surface, the resentment continues to simmer, and occasionally it boils over. In 1772, a British customs schooner, the HMS Gaspee, known for its aggressive and often corrupt enforcement of trade laws, runs aground in Rhode Island while chasing a suspected smuggler. That night, a group of prominent local citizens, their faces blackened with soot to hide their identities, row out to the stranded vessel. They overwhelm the crew, force them ashore, and then set the hated ship on fire. You hear the news with a grim satisfaction. It's a brazen act of defiance, a clear signal that the quiet is not contentment. The British are furious. They offer a huge reward for information and create a royal commission of inquiry to bring the perpetrators to London for trial. A terrifying prospect that bypasses your local courts entirely, but no one talks. The wall of silence is absolute. The community protects its own. Historians still debate whether this 3-year period was a genuine calm, a missed opportunity for statesmen on both sides to find a lasting solution, or if it was merely a strategic pause, an illusion of peace while both sides quietly rearmed for an inevitable conflict. For you, living through it, it feels like the latter. The truce feels fragile, temporary. You enjoy the return to prosperity, but the trust is gone. You are watching, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know that the single, lingering tax on tea is not just a tax. It is a test, and you have a sinking feeling that it is a test everyone is destined to fail. The fire that consumed the HMS Gaspee has died down, but the embers of that defiance are glowing brighter than ever. The British response, this royal commission with the power to drag you from your home and ship you to England for trial, is a terrifying escalation. It is one thing to be taxed, it is another to be stripped of your most fundamental right, the right to be tried by a jury of your own neighbors, people who understand your world. You feel a profound sense of vulnerability. A wall of silence might work in a small, tight-knit community like Rhode Island, but how do you warn the farmers in Virginia or the merchants in Charleston that this is the new tactic? How do you create a colony-wide wall of silence? The newspapers are too slow, and their editors are often under the thumb of a royal governor. You need something faster, something more direct, something that belongs only to you. In Boston, a man who has become the tireless engine of the patriot cause, Samuel Adams, has an idea. He is not a wealthy merchant or a polished lawyer. He is a man of the people, a political organizer of singular genius. In the fall of 1772, he persuades the Boston town meeting to create something new, a permanent committee of correspondence. Its official purpose is to state the rights of the colonists and to communicate them to other towns. Its real purpose is to be the central nervous system of the revolution. It's like building the internet, but with quill pens and horses. The committee acts as a dedicated news-gathering organization, a rapid response team for liberty. Their job is to watch every move the British make, every customs seizure, every military patrol, every rumored act of Parliament, and to write it all down. Then, they send out letters, carried by express riders, to other committees that begin to form in towns all across Massachusetts. The idea is contagious. In the spring of 1773, Virginia's House of Burgesses, spurred on by young, fiery members like Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson, takes the concept and scales it up. They propose that every single colony create its own committee, specifically to communicate with the other colonies about the actions of the British. Within a year, a continental network is in place. A web of communication now connects the bustling ports of the north with the sprawling plantations of the south. An act of oppression in Boston is no longer just a local problem. News of it, written in the passionate language of shared grievance, is now galloping down the post roads to Philadelphia, to Williamsburg, to Charleston. The information travels at the speed of a horse. But in the 18th century, that feels almost instantaneous. This is a profound psychological shift. Your anger is no longer a lonely echo in your own town. It is now amplified and validated by a chorus of voices from 1,000 miles away. When you hear that the people of South Carolina are just as outraged as you are about the threat of trials in London, your own outrage feels more justified, more powerful. The committees create a shared narrative. They ensure that everyone is reading from the same script of tyranny. A British official once called these committees the foulest, subtlest, and most venomous serpent ever issued from the egg of sedition. He was, from his perspective, entirely correct. They were designed to nurture a unified consciousness, a sense that you are all in this together, facing a common threat. The committees of correspondence effectively hijacked the flow of information, creating a channel of communication that the royal authorities cannot control or censor. Historians still debate whether these committees were a true representation of popular sentiment or a sophisticated propaganda machine controlled by a small group of radical elites. But for you, receiving a dispatch in your local tavern, hearing the words of your fellow colonists read aloud, the effect is electrifying. The isolation that has defined your existence, separated by vast distances and regional differences, is beginning to dissolve. The colonies are no longer just 13 separate children in a tense relationship with a parent. They are becoming siblings, sharing secrets, and beginning to plot together how to finally deal with their parents' unacceptable behavior. The network is built. It is humming with energy, waiting for the next great provocation. The network is humming. Your committees of correspondence are now a finely tuned instrument of vigilance, a web of nerves connecting every colony, waiting for the slightest tremor of tyranny from London. You don't have to wait long. In May of 1773, Parliament passes the Tea Act, and as the news travels down the post roads, carried by the frantic hoofbeats of express riders, you realize this is the most dangerously clever move the British have made yet. This is not a hammer blow like the Stamp Act. This is a silken glove, concealing a poisoned needle. The act is not designed to punish you. It's designed to seduce you. You see, the British East India Company, a corporate behemoth that is the 18th century equivalent of a too-big-to-fail global corporation, is on the brink of collapse. It is sitting on a mountain of unsold tea, 17 million pounds of it, rotting in its London warehouses. Many members of Parliament have a personal financial stake in the company, so its failure would be catastrophic for the British elite. So, Parliament devises a bailout plan. The Tea Act gives the company a massive tax break and, more importantly, allows it to ship its tea directly to the American colonies and sell it through a select group of approved loyalist merchants. This bypasses all the middlemen, and the result is that the price of legally imported British tea, even with the small-town Shind duty still attached, will now be significantly lower than the price of the smuggled Dutch tea that everyone has been drinking. This is the psychological trap. Your parent is not raising your allowances price for bread. They are offering you cake at a discount. They are betting on your consumerism, on your love of a good bargain. To overcome your political principles, they believe you will happily pay the tiny, symbolic tax in exchange for a cheap, high-quality cup of tea. By buying the tea, you would be implicitly accepting Parliament's right to tax you. You would be selling your birthright for a mess of pottage, or, in this case, a pot of tea. The sheer, condescending cynicism of it is breathtaking. It is a direct insult to your intelligence and your resolve, and it enrages you far more than a straightforward tax ever could. It's one thing to have a bully try to take your lunch money. It's another to have them try to trick you into giving it to them with a smile. The first tea ships arrive in Boston Harbor in late November. The city holds its breath. A series of massive public meetings, thousands strong, are held to demand that the tea be sent back to England. But the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, a man whose own sons are among the approved tea consignees, refuses. He will not allow the ships to leave until the import duty is paid. It is a standoff. The ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, sit at Griffin's Wharf, their cargo of tea a ticking time bomb. On the night of December 16, 1773, after a final, massive meeting at the Old South Meeting House, Samuel Adams stands and declares, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." This is not a statement of defeat. It is a signal. You follow the crowd as it pours out into the cold, dark streets, heading for the harbor. A strange and disciplined energy fills the air. A group of men, dozens of them, their faces disguised with soot, and their heads adorned with feathers, emerge from the shadows. They are disguised as Mohawk warriors, a symbolic rejection of their British identity in favor of something uniquely American, something wild and untamed. They are the Sons of Liberty. You watch in near silence as they board the three ships. There is no chaotic looting, no drunken riot. This is a mission. For 3 hours, they methodically hoist 342 massive chests of tea onto the decks, split them open with hatchets, and dump the contents into the harbor. An eccentric detail you notice is that the tide is low, and the tea piles up in the mud, so the men have to wade into the frigid water to rake it into the channel. The only sound is the splintering of wood and the soft splash of tea leaves, a fortune in destroyed property, turning the waters of Boston Harbor into one giant, saltwater teapot. Historians still debate how much the tea party was a spontaneous popular uprising versus a carefully orchestrated event stage-managed by Sam Adams and the Sons of Liberty. But as you watch the last chest go overboard, you know one thing for certain. This is no longer a tempest in a teacup. This is a declaration of war, written in tea leaves. The tea is now at the bottom of the harbor, a silent, briny protest that has shocked the world. In Boston, a strange, defiant calm settles over the city. You have thrown the gauntlet down. Now you wait, listening to the silence from across the vast ocean, wondering what the parents' response will be. For months, the silence is deafening. And then, in the spring of 1774, the response arrives. And it is not a scolding letter. It is not a fine. It is a series of hammer blows. A legislative carpet bombing designed not to discipline, but to annihilate the spirit of Massachusetts. It is a response so disproportionate, so cruel, that it reminds you of the old biblical stories of the Pharaoh whose heart was hardened, who, instead of listening to the cries of his people, chose to crush them with plagues. These acts, which the British call the coercive acts, you and your fellow colonists will soon rename. You will call them the intolerable acts, a name that perfectly captures the psychological state they induce. The first act is the Boston Port Act. It is brutally simple. It closes the port of Boston to all trade, in or out. The wharves that were once a forest of masts, bustling with sailors and merchants from every corner of the globe, fall silent. The air, once thick with the smell of tar, salt, and exotic spices, now smells only of stagnant water and economic death. This is not a tax, it is a siege. Parliament is attempting to starve your city into submission, to make an example of you for the other colonies. The message is clear: step out of line, and we will cut off your lifeblood. The second act is the Massachusetts Government Act. This is, in many ways, even more terrifying. It effectively cancels the Massachusetts Charter, the colony's constitution, which has been in place for nearly a century. It strips you of your right to elect your own representative assembly. It outlaws town meetings, the very cradle of your democracy, allowing them to convene only once a year, and only with the royal governor's permission. This is the political equivalent of a lobotomy. It takes away your voice, your ability to think and act for yourself as a community. The parent is no longer just grounding you, they are taking away your ability to speak. Then comes the third, the Administration of Justice Act. You call it the Murder Act. It allows any British official accused of a capital crime while performing their duties in the colonies to be sent to England or another colony for trial. You know exactly what this means. A soldier who fires into a crowd, a customs official who kills a suspected smuggler, will not be tried by a jury of your peers. They will be tried 3,000 miles away by a jury of their own countrymen, who will almost certainly acquit them. It is a license to kill, a grant of impunity. The parent has told the babysitter they can do whatever they want to you, and they will face no consequences. Finally, a new, more menacing quartering act is passed. This one authorizes the quartering of troops, not just in public houses, but in private, unoccupied buildings, and, if necessary, in your own homes. The unspoken fear that has lingered for years is now law. Your sanctuary is no longer sacred. The armed enforcers of these intolerable laws may soon be sleeping under your own roof. Historians still debate whether Parliament's goal was a genuine, if catastrophically miscalculated, attempt to restore order, or a deliberate provocation designed to trigger a conflict that they believed they could easily win. But the psychological effect of these acts is the exact opposite of what Parliament intended. Instead of isolating Boston and terrifying the other colonies into submission, they galvanize them. The other colonies look at Boston and see their own future. They realize that what is happening to you could just as easily happen to them. Food, money, and supplies pour into Massachusetts, overland from as far away as South Carolina. The parent, in trying to punish one child, has inadvertently united all 13 siblings in a bond of shared fear and righteous fury. There is no longer any room for compromise. You are pressed against a wall, and there is no way out but to fight. Your back is pressed firmly against the wall, and the bricks are cold and unyielding. The intolerable acts have left no room to breathe, no space to maneuver. The choice seems to be submission or suffocation. But the committees, that nervous system you built, have sent out a signal not of despair, but of defiance. They have called for a meeting, a grand council, a family meeting to decide, once and for all, how to deal with a parent who has become a tyrant. And so, in the stifling late summer heat of September 1774, you find yourself in Philadelphia. The city is the largest and most sophisticated in the colonies, a bustling hub of commerce and ideas, and it feels like the only possible place for a meeting of this magnitude. You watch as they arrive, 56 delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies. Georgia, the youngest and most vulnerable colony, is too nervous about a potential Creek Indian uprising and its reliance on British military support to send anyone. The men who gather are a study in contrasts. There are the fiery, uncompromising radicals from Massachusetts, the cousins John and Samuel Adams, their faces etched with the urgency of a city under siege. There are the eloquent, aristocratic Virginians, including a tall, imposing, and unusually quiet planter named George Washington, and the passionate orator Patrick Henry. And then there are the cautious conservatives, like Joseph Galloway of Pennsylvania, who still believe, desperately, that a peaceful solution is possible, that the family can be saved. The gathering is not called a parliament or a government. It is simply, and powerfully, the Continental Congress. And here is a small, but telling detail. They do not meet in the elegant Pennsylvania State House, the official seat of government. They meet instead in Carpenter's Hall, the guild hall of the city's builders and architects. The conservative Pennsylvania Assembly, loyal to the Crown, had refused them access, to the more prestigious venue. From its very first moments, the Congress is an act of rebellion, a shadow government meeting in the hall of the working man. The air inside is thick with humidity, the scent of beeswax polish, and a tension so palpable you could carve it with a knife. For 7 long weeks, these men, most of whom are strangers to one another, argue, debate, and plead. It is the ultimate family meeting. You can almost hear the archetypes in their voices. The hot-headed brother from Massachusetts, demanding they stand up and fight. The cautious, wealthy brother from Pennsylvania, begging for moderation, for one last chance to talk things out. The strong, silent brother from Virginia, listening, measuring every word, his very presence a source of gravity and strength. The debates are fierce. Do they arm for war? Do they declare their independence now? Or do they make one last, humble appeal to the king? Historians still debate whether the majority of delegates arrived in Philadelphia secretly desiring independence, or if they were genuinely hoping for a peaceful reconciliation with the crown. In the end, they choose a path of radical moderation. They are not ready for a final break. The psychological umbilical cord to the parent country, though stretched thin, is not yet severed. They draft a declaration of rights and grievances, a letter to the king, not Parliament, still clinging to the hope that George III is a good father, being misled by his wicked ministers. But they also create the Continental Association, their most powerful weapon yet. It is a complete and total boycott of all British goods, and a vow to stop all exports to Britain if the intolerable acts are not repealed. This is a declaration of economic war. It's like a modern, coordinated, global sanction, enforced not by a government, but by a web of local committees who will publicly shame and shun anyone who breaks the boycott. They agree to meet again in the spring of 1775 if their demands are not met. The message to the parent is clear. We have made our final offer. The next move is yours. The delegates leave Philadelphia not just as Virginians or New Yorkers. They leave with the seed of a new, shared identity, the fragile, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling of being an American. The delegates have gone home, their defiant words echoing in the crisp autumn air. The family meeting is over, and the ultimatum has been delivered. Now, you wait. You live in Massachusetts, the eye of the storm, and the waiting is a kind of psychological torture. The parents' answer to your petitions and boycotts is not a letter of reconciliation. It is the steady, chilling sound of hammers and saws. General Thomas Gage, now both your military commander and your royal governor, is turning the city of Boston into a fortress. He is building fortifications on the Boston Neck, the narrow strip of land that connects the city to the mainland. He is, in effect, locking you in, or perhaps locking his own troops in with you. The city you call home has become a cage. The atmosphere is thick with a paranoia you can taste. It is the winter of 1774, and the cold is more than just a matter of weather. A deep, mistrustful chill has settled between neighbors. Who is a friend to liberty? Who is a secret loyalist, a Tory, whispering information to Gage in exchange for favor or safety? Every shadow in a dark alley seems to hold a spy. Every overheard conversation in a tavern could be reported. The redcoats are a constant, occupying presence. Their patrols a reminder of your subjugation. But now, you are watching them as closely as they are watching you. You have your own network of spies, artisans and stable boys and tavern maids, all feeding information to men like Dr. Joseph Warren and Paul Revere. It is a silent, secret war of information being fought in the streets and back alleys of your own town. You saw just how quickly things could explode a few months back. In September, during an incident that came to be known as the powder alarm, Gage, hearing that the colonists had stored a large supply of gunpowder in a powder house just outside of Boston, sent a secret detachment of troops to seize it. They moved in the pre-dawn darkness, a silent, professional operation, but they were seen. Word spread like wildfire. Rumors flew that the British were marching, that the war had begun, that Boston was being bombarded. Within hours, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of colonial militiamen from all over New England had grabbed their muskets and were streaming towards Boston, their faces grim and determined. The massive, spontaneous uprising shocked Gage to his core. He had poked the hornet's nest, and the entire swarm had come out. The alarm was false, and the crowds eventually dispersed, but a powerful lesson was learned on both sides. You realized your own strength, and Gage realized just how close to the edge you all were. In response to this, you and your fellow patriots have reorganized your militia. You are no longer just weekend soldiers. The best, most dedicated men are now designated as Minutemen, ready to fight at a minute's notice. This is not a metaphor. You are expected to keep your musket, your powder horn, and your shot pouch with you at all times. In your field, at your workbench, by your bed, a complex system of signals is arranged, church bells and bonfires, to pass the alarm from one town to the next. The constant state of readiness creates a unique psychological strain. You live your life perched on a knife's edge of anticipation. Every toll of a distant bell sends a jolt of adrenaline through your veins. Is this it? Is this the moment? Historians still debate the character of General Gage. Was he a tyrant, eager to crush the rebellion, or was he a cautious, professional soldier? A man caught in an impossible situation, trying to de-escalate a crisis while following fatally flawed orders from a government that simply did not understand the depth of your resolve. From your vantage point, he is the face of your oppression. As the winter snows begin to melt into a muddy spring, everyone knows that a confrontation is inevitable. Gage has been ordered by London to take decisive action to arrest the Patriot leaders and seize their military supplies, which you have been carefully hiding in towns outside of Boston. The powder keg is full. The fuse has been lit since the first tea chest hit the water, and you can hear it sizzling, getting shorter with every passing day. The sizzling of the fuse has become a high-pitched whine in your ears, a constant, nerve-shredding sound that blocks out all thoughts of compromise. It is March 1775, and you have traveled to Richmond, Virginia. You are packed into St. John's Episcopal Church, a simple, elegant wooden building, far too small for the crowd of delegates that has gathered for the Second Virginia Convention. The air is stale, thick with the scent of wet wool and anxious sweat. The debate you are witnessing is the same one happening in every corner of the colonies. Do we continue to petition, to hope, to wait? Or do we arm ourselves for a war that feels more inevitable with every passing day? The mood is cautious, the moderate voices urging patience. Then a man rises to speak. His name is Patrick Henry. He is not a polished aristocrat. He is a fiery, raw-boned lawyer from the frontier, a man whose voice can range from a conspiratorial whisper to a thunderous roar that seems to shake the very foundations of the church. He begins calmly, respectfully acknowledging the patriotism of those who hold a different view. He speaks of the lamp of experience, the only light he has to guide his feet. He methodically recounts the last 10 years of British actions, the petitions slighted, the remonstrances ignored, the supplications spurned from the foot of the throne. His voice builds, a slow, rising crescendo of righteous anger. He asks the assembly, what is there left to hope for? You feel a change in the room. The shuffling of feet stops. The quiet coughs cease. Every eye is locked on Henry as he paints a vivid, terrifying picture of your reality. Fleets and armies have been sent to your shores. He thunders, not for your protection, but for your subjugation. Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for all this accumulation of navies and armies? He asks, his voice dripping with sarcasm. No, sir, she has none. They are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. They are sent over to bind and rivet upon us those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. The metaphor of chains is a powerful one, a visceral image that transforms a political disagreement into a struggle against slavery. He is reframing the entire conflict. This is no longer a family dispute about taxes. This is a biblical struggle between bondage and freedom. The speech becomes a sermon, a prophetic call to action. He dismisses the arguments that you are weak, that you cannot hope to stand against the might of the British Empire. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. He speaks of a God who presides over the destinies of nations, a God who will raise up friends to fight your battles for you. This is a crucial psychological move. He is taking your fear and your sense of helplessness and replacing it with a sense of divine purpose. You are not just fighting for your rights as Englishmen. You are fighting on the side of God himself. Then comes the final, unforgettable climax. He lowers his voice to an intense, almost intimate whisper. There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. He pauses, his eyes sweeping across the rapt faces of the delegates. He raises his hands as if in shackles. The war is inevitable, he cries, his voice rising again to a roar. And let it come. I repeat it, sir, let it come. He then seems to bow his head, clutching an ivory letter opener to his chest, as if it were a dagger. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? And then the final, immortal words, a shout that seems to tear through the very fabric of time. Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death. A stunned silence fills the church, followed by an eruption of cries of two arms. The debate is over. The moderates have been swept aside by the sheer emotional force of his words. Historians still debate the exact wording of the speech, as it was not written down until decades later, but its effect is undeniable. Patrick Henry has not made an argument. He has cast a spell. He has articulated the deepest fears and the most profound hopes of a generation, transforming the colonists' psychological state from one of reluctant defiance to one of righteous, revolutionary zeal. He has given you the moral permission you needed to cross the final threshold. The prophetic voice of Patrick Henry is still ringing in your ears as you sleep, a ghost of a sound in the cold April air. But you are jolted awake not by a voice, but by the frantic, urgent peal of a church bell tearing through the midnight silence. This is it. This is the signal. The waiting is over. You scramble in the darkness, your hands finding the familiar, cold weight of your musket, the leather of your shot pouch. Outside, you can hear the sound of hoofbeats pounding on the hard-packed dirt road. A rider shouting a single, terrifying word into the night. The regulars are out. The British are on the move. You know the story of this night. You know that 2 lanterns were hung in the steeple of the Old North Church in Boston, a signal that the British were moving by sea, crossing the Charles River in longboats with muffled oars. You know that a silversmith named Paul Revere and a tanner named William Dawes set out on separate routes to warn the countryside. But what you might not know is the small, messy, human truth behind the legend. Revere was actually captured by a British patrol outside of Lexington. Dawes was thrown from his horse and had to walk home. The man who actually carried the warning all the way to the town of Concord was a young doctor named Samuel Prescott, who just happened to be riding home late after courting his sweetheart. The revolution, you realize, often hinges on such small, strange twists of fate. But for now, all you know is that you must move. You join the other men from your town, a grim-faced collection of farmers and blacksmiths, emerging from your homes and making your way to the town common of Lexington. You are about 77 men, a pathetic little force against the 700 elite British infantry that are marching towards you. You stand in 2 uneven lines on the village green as the dawn begins to break, a pale grey light that reveals the dew on the grass and the faces of your neighbours, etched with fear and a stubborn resolve. You can hear them before you can see them, the steady, rhythmic tramp of hundreds of marching feet, a sound designed to intimidate, to crush the spirit. And then they appear, a sea of red coats and gleaming bayonets, an overwhelming, unstoppable force. An officer on horseback, a Major John Pitcairn, rides forward. "Disperse, the rebels," he shouts, his voice hoarse with contempt. "Lay down your arms and disperse." Your captain, a veteran of the French and Indian War named John Parker, gives you a different command. "Stand your ground," he says, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. "Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." And in that impossibly tense moment, a single shot rings out. A puff of white smoke hangs in the still morning air. To this day, no one knows for sure who fired it. Was it a nervous militiaman, a jumpy British soldier, a hidden provocateur? Historians still debate who fired the shot heard round the world. But in that instant, the debate is irrelevant. The British line, without orders, erupts in a volley of fire. The air is filled with a sound like a ragged, terrifying clap of thunder. You feel the hot wind of musket balls whipping past your head. You see men you have known your entire life cry out and fall to the ground. There is smoke, confusion, and the coppery taste of fear in your mouth. The abstract principles you have been debating for 10 years, taxation, representation, liberty, have just become a matter of life and death, right here on this patch of grass. After a few more scattered shots, your small force breaks and runs. The British cheer their easy victory, fire a volley into the air, and continue their march to Concord. But something has fundamentally changed. The parent has not just struck the child. The parent has opened fire, and there can be no turning back. The taste of defeat on Lexington Green is still fresh and bitter in your mouth. But there is no time for despair. The British column marches on to Concord, confident and triumphant, leaving your dead and wounded behind. But something is happening that the British, in their arrogance, cannot see. The alarm is spreading. From every farm, from every village, men are grabbing their muskets and running towards the sound of the fight. The hornet's nest has been kicked, and the swarm is now converging on Concord. When the British arrive there, they find most of the military stores have already been moved and hidden. In their frustration, they begin to search homes and set fire to a few cannons and supplies they do find. A plume of smoke rises into the sky, and you, watching with hundreds of other militiamen from a hill overlooking the town, believe they are burning Concord to the ground. That smoke is the spark that ignites the blaze. A command is given, and you march down to the North Bridge, which is being held by a small contingent of British light infantry. As you advance, they fire a few warning shots, then a full volley. This time, you do not run. You stand, you aim your muskets, and you return fire. The British are shocked. They are used to colonial militia running, but you stand and fight, and their line breaks. They retreat in confusion back to the main force. The professional soldiers have just been beaten back by a group of farmers at a small wooden bridge. A feeling you have never experienced before. A surge of fierce, defiant power courses through you. The British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, realizes his position is untenable. He gives the order to retreat, to march the 16 miles back to the safety of Boston. But there is no safety to be found. What follows is not a retreat. It is a nightmare. For 16 miles, the road to Boston becomes a terrifying gauntlet of death. Thousands of militiamen have now arrived, and they do not form neat lines in an open field. They fight as they hunt, from behind stone walls, from inside barns, from the cover of trees. You fire your musket, reload behind cover, and run ahead to get another shot. It is a brutal, chaotic, and terrifyingly effective form of asymmetric warfare. The British soldiers, trapped on the road in their thick woolen uniforms and rigid formations, are easy targets. Their discipline, once their greatest strength, is now their fatal weakness. You watch as the most powerful army in the world is reduced to a panicked, disorganized mob, running for their lives. By the time they stumble back into Boston, they have suffered nearly 300 casualties. Your own losses are less than 100, but you do not stop. As the sun sets, You and thousands of your countrymen do not go home. You begin digging, you build earthworks, you block the roads, and you surround the city of Boston. In a single, astonishing day, a spontaneous army of farmers and artisans has trapped the British army in the city. The siege of Boston has begun. 2 months later, in June, you are given a new, audacious order. You are to